Welcome to Resiliency Redefined. I'm your host, Robyne, and I am thrilled to share with you information about resiliency, well-being, performance, education, business, parenting, and everything in between. I'm committed to joining you each week to talk about these big ideas and bring them into action, habits, tools, strategies, tactics that allow us to finally uncover what it takes to truly be well. And I'm just so excited that you're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Resiliency Redefined. I'm looking forward to diving into this topic with you. The topic is all about the psychological benefits of nature. Now, this week we are celebrating in Canada, we are celebrating Mental Health Week, and lots of folks are talking about these different concepts and ideas around mental health. And one of the areas that I notice when we're talking about mental health, and a question I often get asked is this: we are talking more about mental health than we ever have before. However, it seems as though mental health incidences or the prevalence of mental health conditions, it's rising. And that's not wrong. Yes, we're talking about it more. And yes, we see this increase in mental health. And there's a lot of variables that are at play. And I appreciate we talk about this in Stress Wisely as a wicked problem. By definition, a wicked problem means that we have this very complex variable, and the solution and what's contributing to this variable is so multifaceted, and there's not one solution that's going to address it all. So by definition, a wicked problem is super complicated and there's no one way to fix it. And I know right now, even when I'm looking at my social reels and my social media, that so many people are talking about mental health and all these different things that we ought to do or could be doing or should be doing. I just wanted to bring us back, though, to some of the fundamentals about what we know about mental health in terms of ways of working with our mental health and our mental well-being, again, which is the power of nature. So I'm very glad that you are here. And without further ado, let's take a deep dive into this. Now, from an evolutionary perspective, we know that nature is our first home. It is our first teacher. There is essentially everything that we need to be relatively well, we know to a degree, is found in nature. Even when we think about, for example, the medicines that we take to help us, most of that was derived from nature. There's even really fascinating kind of conversation and an important conversation about how indigenous ways of knowing and indigenous knowledge, that essentially that when, if you look at colonialism, that a lot of this knowledge was actually taken from indigenous people that eventually then made its way into pharmacies. And so again, there's this rich history of nature being medicine, nature being our first healer. And there were a few key ideas that I wanted to bring to light today. And there's no particular order in terms of these benefits, but one of the reasons why this really landed for me is, as I've shared before, and you maybe have been following on social media or my other podcast with Peter, I have been on a very full calendar for the last, I don't know, about 16 weeks. It has been very full scheduling. And recently, I just happened to be out in Whistler, and Hunter came with me. He was my little sky buddy. My sky buddy is when I travel with someone. So Hunter finished his last exam and he said, "Mom, I can't wait to come home and see you in Peterborough." And I was literally heading out to catch a flight to Whistler. And I said, instead of coming home, meet me at Pearson Airport and come with me to Whistler, be my sky buddy, and hang out with me in the mountains for a couple of days. So Hunter and I headed out, which is, again, so much privilege. And I appreciate that. I, first of all, have a kid who still wants to hang out with me, and B, we can jump on a plane and be in such a beautiful part of Canada. Anyway, so the next morning, we went out to find coffee. I love to do a good morning walk and forage for my coffee. And of course, I'm in nature, like the trees, the mountains, the sounds, all of this. Like spring is unfolding right now in Whistler. And what was so remarkable as I was taking in all of these sights of nature and being in nature, literally wearing like a tracksuit and like a baseball cap, going to find coffee really early in the morning, because clearly we were on Eastern time zones, Hunter and we were kind of got a wee bit turned around as we were navigating these paths from the hotel to where there was coffee. And we realized the quickest way to get back on track was actually to like cut across this parking lot to get us onto another trail. But to do that, we had to go over this bit of green space, which you could walk across. It's clearly other people have walked across this. And I kid you not, when I took a step off of the pavement and step onto the ground, like onto the earth, I actually stopped because all of a sudden it was this like total different experience. Like there was this interesting, just like awareness of just this, like this energy. And I realized I'd been walking on sidewalks, concrete, pavement, gosh, asphalt, you name it. I'd been walking all these like created resources, right? So walking in all these man made materials. And this was like the first time in so many weeks that I actually stepped on earth, like literally on earth. I'd been in so many buildings, as I said, and I kind of stopped and I said to Hunter, I'm like, dude, I just need a minute. I'm like taking this in. And of course, thankfully, my little sky buddy was just like, yeah, you do you, mom. And I just stood there for a moment and I was just, again, in awe of what it felt like, what my foot felt like standing on the earth, like with the pine needles underfoot. The ground was just a wee bit squishy because the frost was coming out of the ground. And it just, again, my eyes had been seeing nature, but for whatever reason, in that moment, I felt that nature, which again reminded me, as going into mental health awareness, that there is so many things around us that can help soothe our nervous systems. And why this is important as it relates to mental health, there's this idea that's called diathesis stress model, which talks about that stress exacerbates underlying conditions. This is why stress is so interconnected and comorbid with so many different mental health conditions, because stress makes it worse. So, as this idea is unfolding here right now in this moment with you, I want to share with you some of these practices that we know. Obviously, this doesn't resolve or solve mental health pieces, but it doesn't hurt. And if anything, I think it actually can help. Again, it doesn't fix it and solve it because there's underlying, again, a wicked problem. There's a lot of moving parts when it comes to mental health, but these are things that I do think can help our weary nervous systems. So, number one, we get outside, right? Simply being outside, getting out of these buildings, out of these kind of man made structures, person made structures. It's so important for a lot of different reasons. But one in particular I want to highlight is something about fractals. Now, what fractals are is this idea that the majority of what our brain processes when we are indoors is 90-degree angles. Okay, just think about it. Even wherever you are, if it's kind of safe for you just to pause and look around, look at all the 90-degree angles, computer screens, buildings, sidewalks, roadways, pictures, TVs. Like all of these things are sharp 90-degree angles. And 90-degree angles aren't necessarily natural. As soon as you go outside, your brain starts to see all of these other shapes, all of these other dimensions, all these other angles, which then activates a different part of our brain that brings a soothing effect. And when our brain is able to have this soothing effect because of the unpredictability of the fact that we're not surrounded by 90-degree angles, different parts of our brain are activated, and it creates what they call alpha brain waves, which is this idea of I'm trying to think of like how to say this in like it's this idea of what we call like we're focused, but it's this idea that it's almost like a relaxed focus. Okay. So when we are in this place, it's like we have what we call this alertness, but it's alert in a relaxed way. So it isn't like heightened awareness in terms of like threat. It's this idea of, let's call it relaxed alertness. So we are aware of what's around us, but it isn't perceived in any way as difficult or a threat. So relaxed awareness. I think that will make sense to call it that. So our alpha brainwaves are functioning when we're outdoors. It's also referred to when we are outdoors and that change physiologically and neurologically. It's talked about in the research as forest bathing, right? As soon as we go outside, all of a sudden our serotonin levels start to rise, our cortisol starts to decrease. Like all of these kind of mysteries of nature start soothing these nervous systems. So that idea about these fractals, this idea of these 90-degree angles overwhelming our nervous system, going outside opens this unpredictability where we're able to have this relaxed alertness. So again, getting outside to kind of take in different shapes and sizes. Now, the other thing that's interesting as well, but when we go outside, and this was actually an idea that Jenna flagged for me in research she came upon, and I appreciated her sharing it with me, was the power of birdsong. So when birds are playing, right, when birds are in this kind of moment of merriment and they're engaged in bird song, there's an evolutionary component to it that our brains hear that it is safe, that there is life around, there's resources around, which activates a sense of calmness. So again, just how fascinating is that? That, we're just going out, minding our business, out for a walk. Birds are playing, chirping, doing their thing. And on this deep physiological level, those bird songs are literally soothing our nervous system in the background. Like literally in the background, just soothing our nervous system. The idea of birdsong. So being outdoors, hearing that could be pretty powerful. Another really interesting thing that we can do when we're outdoors to help with these weary nervous systems is a practice called drifting, which is the psychological state when our brain sees water. So soon as our brains see water, it starts to soothe and regulate our nervous system. So again, just think about that. Anytime you are around water, you hear water, or even if you are indoors, but you're simply washing your hands, like mindfully washing your hands could be so cathartic. It could be so soothing. It's also why, for example, after, when we talk about transition practices, end of day task switch, and especially if you work in this like really kind of thinking world or like a world where you're really of service, having a shower at the end of your shift or at the end of the day, getting out of your uniform, whether it be a work uniform or just a super cute Aritzia pantsuit, like whatever it is, and having a shower like washes the day away. It's the same as we babies when we have those bedtime, bath time routines where we're just getting like cleansed, we're just getting ready for the beautiful practice of sleep. So, water, my friends, is an amazing ingredient in nature that allows us to be able to have those drifting effects that cools off the nervous system. I remember speaking of water, I remember once working with a colleague, and at the time, like Nalgene water bottles were really popular. I don't know if folks remember Nalgene. It feels like Stanley is the new Nalgene. And I promise you, you won't start drinking more water just because you have a new Stanley. Anyway, I digress. But Nalgene bottles were really popular. And I remember working in it, my colleague said, like, wow, you take a lot of like water breaks. Like you get a lot of water. And I was like, yeah, I try to drink, a Nalgene bottle in the morning and one in the afternoon. And he said, I've never tried that. And I had this moment where I'm like, sorry, you never tried like drinking water? And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, dude, the majority of us are dehydrated. Like when you talk about, your sluggishness and your tiredness in the afternoon, drinking water could be just an easy first step. And I gave him this analogy. I'm like, okay, think about it this way. Our bodies are so made up of water, which we know it's like a ton of it. Most of it's made out of water. And if you're not putting fresh water in, I think about it as like a dirty goldfish bowl. Like our body's a goldfish bowl. And if you're only putting like half a cup in, like it just kind of just stays in this like dirty water. But throughout the course of the day, if we actually like clean out our whole system by drinking water, we'll have clean goldfish bowls. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it made sense with me. And anytime I'm short on my water intake, I imagine a cloudy goldfish bowl and think my organs deserve better than that. Anyway, so I tell my colleague, drink water. It'll help with mental brain fog, sluggishness, all the things. So I remember the next day he came into the office and he's like, hey, I had a glass of water and I still didn't feel any different. And I was like, it is a practice. It's not just one cup of water. It's like the practice of drinking water. Anyway, so water, powerful. A couple other ideas that I wanted to talk about right now also is this idea about what happens with our thinking when we are outside. The best ideas, the breakthroughs, the unlocks, I am convinced do not happen at boardroom tables or behind screens or in office settings. They happen in a shower for a reason. They happen outdoors when you're walking for a reason because we're having just this opportunity for creativity. And what I mean by that is when we go outside, our brains naturally lean into this feeling of sufficiency, this feeling of abundance. When we're indoors all day, we feel this sense of scarcity or shortage. And we're kind of trying to operate kind of in that place of again, scarcity of resources, scarcity of ideas, scarcity of energy. But as soon as we go outside, we can feel incredibly different simply by going outside. And, I love that kind of example about take your worries for a walk, right? Take your problems for a walk. And I believe it was Ryan Holiday who said, if you take your problem for a walk, it might not fix it, but it won't make it any worse, right? So going for a walk might not fix your problem, but it definitely won't make it worse. So again, when we go outside, we're activating a different part of our brain that allows us to have an increase in creativity, an increase in critical thinking, problem solving, all these really great processes that when we are indoors all day, we actually aren't really capitalizing on. We're not really using that to our advantage. Now, the other idea to share with you here is the importance of getting sunlight or even outdoors. It doesn't have to be like sunlight. Even if it's cloudy, our brains are still getting the goods, having it first thing in the morning. Because what that does, interestingly, is this like cue that says, this is the start of our day. Our brains are designed to be essentially in what we call the power of thirds. Our brains were meant to essentially work, gather, work, function 8 hours a day. And then 8 hours a day were meant to be, again, in this place of play, of connection, of discovery, of curiosity, of puttering. And 8 hours a day were essentially designed to sleep. And we have essentially 16 hours, ideally, of alertness, and then we'll have 8 hours of recovery. When we get outside first thing in the morning, imagine that like the go button, right? That it sends the cue to your brain that, okay, our day is starting. And then what we see in the research and in the lab, 16 hours later, your brain just coming up to those 16 hours is going to start to wind down because it knows it's time for recovery, right? It knows it's time to get ready for sleep. When we have cued it first thing in the morning with daylight. Okay. And again, it doesn't have to be blazing sunshine. Simply go outside and we will start to have that benefit. This is so important, especially for folks who are listening who, for example, work remotely, perhaps or are doing online courses, online schooling, and you don't kind of get outside until lunchtime. There's a really good chance that that's really kind of messing with your circadian rhythms. But if you could, even before you start, think of it almost like having a morning commute where you like go outside, even if it's just standing on your porch, on your driveway, on your balcony, out the front door, whatever it looks like. That's going to say, okay, this is my 16 hours of productivity. And then we're going to be able to start having that reset for preparing ourselves for a reset, which will make sleep better. Okay, so those are a couple ideas that I wanted to share with you. Another idea that I wanted to bring forward as well. So it's when we think about this kind of idea about, our time outdoors, the idea that I want to share with you is a practice that when we think about it, is this expansive view. Okay, what I mean by expansive view is the fact that when we go outside, all of a sudden our world opens up. Our world opens up. All of a sudden, there's more possibilities. Now, that ties in to what I just shared with you about the abundant mindset or the sufficiency mindset when we go outside. But it's interesting because this is actually called the small self effect. Small self effect. So when we're indoors and we're marinating in our problems, right? We're marinating in our misery and the tasks and the to-do-ness. We feel very big, right? Like we are the center of all of this action, of all of these responsibilities. But as soon as you go outside and we take in nature, what happens is we have the small self effect where we realize that we are kind of little but part of a beautiful interconnected system. And I absolutely love when like astronauts talked about like what it's like to like look back at Earth from space. Commander Christopher Hatfield in his books, he talks about this idea of what it was like to see Earth and just that I believe he talked about this idea that just had this abundance of compassion of just how precious and little this whole thing was in this vastness of greatness, which is just so interesting. Um, Again, as I shared with you right at the top of this episode, that idea about tactile grounding, this is especially, that's that tactile grounding is that experience I had when I touched earth as in like soil and dirt and pine needles in Whistler on my way to get very refined coffee. That idea, that tactile grounding, this can be super helpful, especially for children. Okay. There's something really powerful about like touching the grass. And again, I know that, we bundle up our kids, especially in mud season, which we're experiencing right now in the spring, but there's something so important about being able to have that tactile experience, to be able to pick up the sticks, to be able to touch the rocks, feel the water, even just being able to walk in bare feet on grass, if there's obviously a safe and way that you can do that, even as grown-ups, sitting on the grass, like again, connecting with it is so very important because it does this amazing effect on our nervous systems. And we also know that there's some interesting research that talks about walking on bare feet on grass actually quickens our recovery for jet lag, which is, I think, pretty useful to know as somebody who likes to bounce around time zones. Okay, so I hope that there has been an idea in here or two that has maybe sparked just a little bit of curiosity about how we can spend just a wee bit more time in nature. Now, my call to action for you, if folks who are listening and are looking for something, I really encourage you to follow my colleague, Dr. James Rouse. He's a functional medicine doctor. He works out of a treehouse in Colorado. I've talked about him before. He's such an amazing human. He has just such beautiful insights into the power of nature. And he's a great guy to follow on social media just to give us our daily doses of what we call, outdorphins, right? Outdorphins isn't actually a technical word. Outdorphins is just this amazing effect that summarizes, I think, all of the things that we get from being in nature. The other piece, too, that we can tie this kind of with a bow is the idea that us looking after nature, eco stewardship, also is extremely healing. So tending to nature, being part of nature, cultivating and fostering nature can also be extremely helpful for each and every one of us. Okay, my friends, I hope that was helpful just to, again, thinking about just some of these really cool effects about nature and the relationship with mental health. We do know that it does decrease the experiences of depression and anxiety the more people get out. We know it's good for our blood pressure. There's a whole host of things that benefit us. And Dr. Greg's research, Dr. Greg's Wells, he has research that even talks about the fact that this reduces all-cause mortality. Because there's these little things out there in nature that boost our immune system and all the good. So please, 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 please. Oh, there's my little throwback to Sabrina Carpenter, which, by the way, she looked adorable at the Met Gala in her little suit. I digress. This idea of please get outside. Like, please go outside, make time for it, because the little practice of going outside, it's going to give you a ginormous benefit. And it's like giving your weary nervous system a hug from Mother Nature. Okay, my friends, hope that helped. If it was useful, please let us know in the comments, share questions, curiosity. I'm here to be of service, and I very much look forward to sharing time with you in our next episode. Take good care, and bye for now. Thank you for spending time with this podcast episode today. I hope you found something helpful in Resiliency Redefined. Please feel free to share it with somebody who you might think could benefit. Maybe there was something useful, something in particular that you think you could pay forward. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate and review this podcast wherever you like to listen to your podcast. It means the world to me. And again, thanks for your time. Thank you for your interest. Take good care, and I'll see you next time.